myself. Hey, man, it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. So before we get into your life as a creative, I want to know 4 years ago, this pandemic was raging. No one knew how long it was going to last. Now that we're hypothetically speaking out of it, how did you survive that time period and how did it change the way that you create and do things now?
Well, certainly I'm in Brooklyn, and here was the epicenter of the worst and the worst of it when it happened. Right across the street was Brooklyn Hospital, where all the trucks went and showed all the people dying and the sirens going on. It really was ground zero for the epidemic. So we were really locked down here. New York, I think, lost 20,000 people alone in that first month or whatever. So nobody left. And at that point, it was I'm a freelancer. At that point, I was working for Discovery Channel full time, but of course from home. But I had so much extra free time that it really helped jumpstart my new career, which I've been doing ever since, which is writing novels. I
Yeah.
had so much bloody time. And of course, as you know, if you're a New Yorker, everything happens outside. You meet your friends at the bars and restaurants because you all have tiny little apartments and you can't host. So all that went away. And so I had a lot of bloody time to sit around, and I wrote my first novel, which just came out in May, Primetime Travelers, mostly because I had the time and the discipline to do it. So while it was a very dark time, it definitely helped jumpstart something that I've been trying to do for a long time, which is segue into this new career.
So talk to me a little bit about not only right now being a writer, but before that, if we were to figure out exactly how your life has transpired as a creative, and I put you in front of a bunch of third grade students at career day, and one of the kids said, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How would you answer them?
Boy, that's a tricky one, I suppose, because I've done a couple different things. But I'd say I've always been a writer. I've always been driven by visual medium. When I was a young kid, I was enamored of movies. I would stay up late and watch all the great classics. I love the big epics, the Lawrence of Arabia's and the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and the Seven Samurai. I love to be swept away to historical locations, and that really kind of helped again shape who I was when I got out of college. I went to film school, but it wasn't until I traveled, it wasn't until I backpacked through the Middle East that I found my muse, and that's ancient history and traveling. And I became particularly enamored of Egypt and Mesopotamia and those places. So I went to film school for documentary. And ever since then, I've been making documentary films about the ancient world, archaeology shows for History Channel and PBS and Discovery and Nat Geo. So, in a nutshell, I think what's driven me is travel and history and creative writing and finding ways to lump those together, be it documentaries for Nat Geo or the books. They all come from that single muse, that sense of travel to that ancient world.
So take me back to where you were born and raised and how these seeds of having a thirst for travel and creating and showing people these lands. How did all of this kind of get harvested and grow into who you are?
I grew up in a small town outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which didn't have any of those opportunities. Wonderful parents who let me pursue whatever I want to, like movies, and they sent me to film school. But I didn't know about the rest of the world. I went to a small Catholic high school, so it was pretty insular. So I didn't know about ancient history. I didn't study that stuff, and it wasn't until I got my degree, my bachelor's degree from Temple University, as a MFA or a master's of filmmaking, and went to New York thinking I would become Martin Scorsese overnight. Instead, I was a poor schlub holding the walkie-talkie at 2 in the morning, watching the grip truck so it doesn't get stolen in like Queens. So it was rather dispiriting, and I had a lot of free time in between those jobs if I did get them at all. And I'm talking like bottom of the barrel. I was working like Toxic Avenger 4 and all the worst of the worst, but I was happy to get to work. But I had so much free time in between and not a much money to do with it that I started hanging out at the New York Public Library because it was free and it was air conditioned. And one day, for whatever reason, I picked up a book about the rise of civilization. Something that I didn't get, as I say, in my small Catholic school, was about Neolithic times and about how language and civilization was created. And some penny dropped, and I became absolutely enamored of history. It's something I never had before. So I resolved to teach myself history through the New York Public Library. It was free, and I had the time. And I read book after book after book. And it wasn't until I got to Egypt and Greece and Rome that I really got stuck. Those cultures became so overwhelmingly exciting and familiar that I became just enamored of it so much that I actually kind of dropped out and backpacked for 8 or 9 months through those lands, particularly Egypt, Syria, Iran, Turkey. And I just those cultures are so fascinating to me that when I came back from the trip, I resolved to find a way to do this full time, have somebody pay me to go back rather than using the little money that I got from Toxic Avenger 8 to do it. So I got my master's degree in filmmaking, and then luckily my first film about the restoration of the Great Sphinx, I sold to Discovery Channel, and I've been off and running ever since. I
Wow.
probably made over 1,000 hours of television for all the networks since 1997. So it really has kind of become my calling card.
Isn't that ideal though to have that kind of a gig where you're in control of your own destiny versus being a part of this big, huge production where your name gets lost in the credits in the end? It's like this is your world and you're doing exactly what you want.
I mean, I love what I do, and I certainly know that world so well that people do come to me. Just yesterday, someone reached out about a film about Troy from UK. Oh, I heard how you know about Troy, and it's great that people find me and I have that expertise. But keep in mind too that this is not independent. I am working for the corporations. I am working for Discovery, PBS, BBC. There's an anonymity to it because I am creating films for them. I am not famous. No one knows the name Neil Laird because he's way at the very bottom of the credits. So I'm definitely creating films that are paid for and shaped by the corporations, which is the network. So there's a template to follow.
Yeah.
So it's not exactly I can go off and just tell the story I want to, but I love those stories and I very much understand that kind of storytelling device. So it doesn't feel like I'm compromised too much. But I certainly am making films for a mass audience, which isn't necessarily the ones that I would do independently for YouTube or whatever. So there is definitely a give and a take.
Yeah, that's great clarification. So who's been a hero? Who have you admired in your work or in general in your life?
In terms of this world or
Probably, yeah. I think the Venn diagram would bleed into itself. As a human being and as a creative, who has been that hero for you that's helped you, you know, push yourself and be who you are in life?
it's a tricky one, I think, because in my travel world, I think it's just the people that I've met along the way. I could probably answer that more directly. Where when I transitioned to writing my first novel, uh, because that was a big thing to do, and I was still working in television, still do freelance in television, but it's a very big challenging thing to write a novel and
Yeah.
and to create something that you don't know the language for, whatever. And I remember it happened. I wrote my first novel started in 2016. And I remember that year because two things happened that year that were very seminal. One, I turned 50. And I realized, well, you're getting old, Mr. Laird. You better get off the bloody pot and do something. It's like stop talking about writing the novel, or then you'll be 60 and regret it. And then another thing that's even more seminal happened that same year, and this sort of answers your question. My idol, the one artist that I always follow religiously since I was 15, died, David Bowie.
Wow.
And even though Bowie does music, and I have no musical skill or desire to do that, I've been enamored of Bowie since 1979 or something, and every album I bought. And what I realized when I read his obituaries, even though I knew it, it was something that kind of came back and really got me particularly off the pot, was when you look at his obituary and what he did was he was fearless. If anyone knows David Bowie, you know that every album was a different world. He changed his style. He took people in new directions. He was never afraid to fail.
Yeah.
27 albums he did, and most of them were brilliant, and he was unafraid to try something new and then move on. And that sense of fearlessness made me realize, oh my God, I can't, I'm not trying to say that I'm a David Bowie. I would never be so presumptuous, but I thought if he could do that 27 times, I could do it once.
Yeah.
I could write my novel. And that really was the guiding light is, oh my God, the one person is always excited and challenged me is gone. It's like, all right, I'm going to do my Bowie. I'm going to write one novel.
Yeah, what a cool cat, man. He did so many things. He worked with Lynch and there was a poem and if I can find it, I'll send it to you. There was a woman that wrote a poem about him. She saw him on the street of New York and it was such a monolithically beautiful like thing. Like she knew who he was, but saw it from afar and was like, damn, he's like this god. It was
He
so
really is. For
cool.
those of us who love him, I used to do something in that poem. Because for those, I mean, I'm still not quite convinced he's dead. I can't believe David
I
Bowie died.
know, man.
He's too cool to die. This must be some art installation piece he's doing. He's going to come back and say, look at the
Yeah.
album that I made from the dead.
Jim Morrison and Elvis couldn't do it, but I can.
Exactly right.
So, I talked to Donnie McCaslin, who was on his last album, the sax player, and I talked to
Oh
him
wow.
about 3 or 4 weeks after Bowie passed. And he was in a hotel room, and the world was just a vortex around him. I'll never forget it. He was just totally spun into this world that he just didn't know existed because everybody was enamored that Bowie saw him in a club and picked him for his last album. So, oh man, the Bowie memories. So I'm curious, as a creative, what's the one pie in the sky movie, film, place you want to go to? What's the big King Kong signature film you want to make?
Boy, that's tough, I think, because I have so many. I mean, growing up loving films, I can't say there's one that is the one that I want to make. And since I do documentaries, not narrative, but I do find, and maybe I already mentioned this, I can't remember. I do find I didn't. I grew up, went to film school, so of course, when you're in film school, you kind of pretentious guy that does the you follow Antonioni and Bergman and all the kind of classics. And I love that stuff when I was 25. But I realized as I started writing, the films that influenced me the most, the ones that got under my skin, I didn't know it until I started writing, were those big epics. The Seven Samurai, the Lawrence of Arabia, the Good, the Bad, the Ugly, these films that I loved growing up, particularly, Raiders of the Lost Ark. I just did a podcast all about Raiders of the Lost Ark because even though at the time you watch those films as a kid, you don't realize how deeply they influence you. And they're all the same, I think, in that they have one thing. They take you to another world, usually real worlds. I don't like fantasy films, the Lord of the Rings, those kind of stuff as much. I love those ones that take an historical time period, but create an adventure, create a journey. Those things are the ones that suck me in more than anything else. Gladiator and those kind of movies. And I didn't know how influential they were until I started writing. And I realized, oh my God, I'm actually lifting entire line from Raiders of the Lost Ark here. That's how deeply embedded they are in my psyche. So those are the films that I think I still chase and try to create my own world around.
I always love hearing about how James Cameron totally gets immersed in that world. When he did Titanic and he did all these films, like everything stops and he puts every single ounce into it. I've always respected that notion of just, I mean, because even with Titanic, it's a story told a billion times. Like there was every chance that that movie was just going to be another one in the pantheon of historical movies, right? But
Right.
it just worked. He like
It
did it.
works. It works with a spectacle. Again, yeah. I mean, I watched the film just fairly recently, and the script is a bit ropey, and some of the things are a bit obvious, but it doesn't matter because the world that he builds,
Yeah.
the world that he creates, is so transporting. People often ask me what the most influential film I ever saw was, and it's probably one of the first that I did, and it certainly is no classic, but it is the one that I think attracted me to cinema and the magic more than any other. And I saw it when I was 6 years old. I went with my parents. Somehow they were going to see an adult movie, and I tagged along, and it was the Poseidon Adventure. If you
Wow.
remember this
Yep.
movie,
Hmm.
and I was a 6 year old kid, and this was in 1972. This was a radical film, a bunch of people dying and very dramatic. But I was so pulled into that world. They created this landscape. I mean, the high concept nature, a ship upside down. So an ocean liner capsizes, and now you might as well be on Mars or whatever. So it's these people going through this landscape. It's real, but it's not.
Yep.
So that's what I like. I like those films that are sort of grounded in the real world as opposed to creating this mythology, but turning it literally and figuratively on its head.
Yeah.
And the Poseidon Adventure is one of those. So I couldn't believe people could even make this. So I remember leaving the theater, 6 or 7 years old again. So put that in mind, in downtown Pittsburgh, and it was a very crowded theater. And I lost my parents along the way as the crowd was going out. And I knew I'd catch up with them, wasn't freaked out, but I went by myself up to the lobby, and it had a poster of the Poseidon Adventure. And I can still remember this night, and as clear as day. There was a poster of the silhouette of the ship upside down, and then beneath it, little boxes of the actors who were in it. And Shelley Winters as the whatever, the old lady with a heart of gold, and Gene
Yep.
Hackman as the preacher. And then down below it had a list of all the people who were in it, and directed by Roald Neame or whatever. And a penny dropped, and I realized, oh my God, someone made this.
Yeah.
This was a young kid thinking this, and it's a very abstract thought for a 6 or 7 year old. Was somebody somewhere took me on that roller coaster ride. I just watched Shelley Winters die, and people, all this drama that was going on, and yet it was a creation of some creative people somewhere never heard of. They came together and they created this roller coaster, this world. And I was absolutely fascinated. I wanted to do it then. Even then, I knew I wanted to make movies. I want to do what they're doing
Yeah.
because I couldn't believe the emotions were somehow created by a group of people somewhere. And the feeling that I had right now was due to somebody else's creativity. I've been fascinated by that kind of world since.
So, what is it that gets you up every day? What is the internal motor in you that makes you create and have this thirst for travel and adventure and to present that to everybody, either in word or in motion picture?
I think certainly, I think it is storytelling. I love to write. Writing is my thing, whether it's a documentary, whether it's I do reviews for a couple historical sites. And particularly now that I started my novel, I just came back from a month in Turkey where I'm writing the third novel of this Primetime Traveler series, and it's about Troy. Each of the books is a time travel story where the TV crew goes to the ancient past to tell a film and win an Emmy. So it does have this fantastic elements of time travel, but I very much researched that world. So in the last month, I spent a month in Turkey going to Troy and taking notes and just immersing myself into it. And I love creating those, discovering those things, doing the research, and then translating them in a way that's populist and accessible to other people. And I think I've been doing that for 30 odd years, first through my film work and TV work, and then through my novels. And I think that's what gets me up is that to be ability to take you to Pompeii on the eve of the eruption and have you live vicariously through it. That's the stuff that gets me up because I want to take the things that I'm so enamored of and make you care about them and make you as as transported as I have been. And that creates creativity and then it creates work. But when I'm in that world, I get up at 6 a.m., 4 a.m., whatever. I can't wait to get back there and create that scene where Mount Vesuvius finally erupts.
Yeah,
That stuff is just so exciting. It drives me.
absolutely. So, what's been the best fan letter you've ever gotten?
That's a tricky one. I think, I mean, I'm certainly not a celebrity in that regard. When you do television or when you write books, it's not like I'm Stephen King or Steven Spielberg. But just recently, now that I'm doing a podcast to talk about the book and to kind of get the word out, another podcast creator reached out just a few weeks ago. I reached out to him and said, "Oh, you're doing things about television and paranormal and stuff, things that I dispute." And he got back to it. "Oh my God, you are Neil Laird. You were one of my dream interviewees. I've been following your stuff on History Channel and Discovery for years. I know this film and this film and this film, and oh my God, I'm pinching myself. I can't believe Neil Laird is going to be on my podcast." At first, I'm thinking, what kind of ruse is this? Are you going to try to sell me a swampland in the Everglades? And I just realized, oh, there are people who actually read those credits at the end of those shows. And
Sure.
Neil Laird, among so many films about mystery and history, that there are people that actually do follow it and get to know the name. And that was wonderful for me because when you work in television, particularly, there's an anonymity. You send it out there. You don't know who watches it. You get your overnight ratings and know how it did, but you have no idea who's watching and how closely they're watching. Are they watching to the end? Do their remote control fall down the sofa and they can't change the channel? Just how actively attuned are they? So when I get these kind of emails, it's like, oh my God, they actually do have a fan base who loves these shows and recognize that I'm a part of their creation. So I think that's a very late fan letter, but it's nice to know, oh, okay, there are people out there who know what Neil Laird does.
So, of everything that you've done in your life up to this point, what are you the proudest of?
I think the first film that I did, um, which is my thesis film for grad school, I went to Columbia College Chicago, and it was one that I pulled together because I had some connections on the Egyptian Antiquities Board. A fellow student's father was on the board. He got some free permits for us. So I went over there with school equipment. I did a documentary about the restoration of the Great Sphinx, and I just followed the workers around for 3 or 4 weeks in Cairo as they are racing to save the Sphinx, which was the title of the film. And that you were talking about that creative, unloosed creativity. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I was enamored with this. And it has such a wonderful setting. The Sphinx was falling apart and they were putting cladding stones on it. And they were restoring them because the Italians were hired to do it a few years earlier and did a botch job. So they got some stonemasons from Egypt to do it in the traditional way. And I got to know these stonemasons and follow them around for 2 weeks. And it was such a gift to spend time with these people and to think that, oh my God, this is what I'm doing with my time. Here I am, this kid from Greensburg, Pennsylvania, and I am going in secret passageway in the Sphinx, following a bunch of Egyptian stonemasons around. It was such a wonderful, wonderful sense of privilege and excitement that it still fuels me creatively today. And I'm very proud of that film because it was the first time I ever did it. And it definitely jump-started a whole new career. Once I made that film, I went right to directing. I didn't have to climb the ladder. I went right to the producer phase. And I look back at now and said, oh shit, for something I did when I was 24, it's not half bad.
Yeah, for sure. So at the end of the day, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, fans, everyone you work with, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, you asked some tough questions. It's funny, and I think when I talk to people on my Facebook, and my fans, and my books, people reach out. They're always fascinated by what I do, the travel and the ability to sort of leap before I look. And I think I have been fairly fearless. I'm certainly not a David Bowie level, but I certainly been fearless on just trying it, just going out and just seeing what happens and not being afraid to fall on your feet. Writing your first novel is not easy, and if I went in thinking about it too hard, I probably wouldn't have done it. So I think when people look at me, they always applaud me for saying, hey, man, I can't believe you actually pulled that off. I've been talking about making a film. I've been talking about going to Egypt and seeing the pyramid. I've been talking about writing that novel, and I never have. And I've done it. I can't say I've always greatly succeeded or become rich doing it, but I'm not afraid to try. And I think those who follow me and the friends who know me really recognize that if there's a possibility in doing it, Neil Laird will try.
So if anyone wants to pick up the book, look into your work, your enormous, wonderful body of work, anything in your world, where can they go?
Well, the book is available on Amazon, Primetime Travelers. If you just Google name on Amazon or Neil Laird, you can find that. The sequel, Primetime Pompeii, comes out in a few months. Um, and then my website, neillaird.com, I can give you a link to my newsletter and everything. And if people are interested right now, in a week or two, if you want to subscribe to my newsletter on my website, I'll soon be sending out ARC advanced reader copies of Pompeii to kind of get feedback and to help me get reviews for book 2. And I'm always looking for people to do that if they're interested. So sign up on that, and then you'll get a free copy. And with hopefully with the understanding you'll review it within the launch day.
Excellent. Neil, this has been wonderful. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. I'm going to look for that Bowie poem and send it over to you. Keep doing the wonderful work in the world, man.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. Cheers.
Appreciate it. Take care. Cheers.